Hey, Retcon Raider here. The Phoenix Point crowdfunding campaign still seems to be chugging along at a slow but steady rate, so it's only a matter of time before they reach their first stretch goal. But until then, I figured I'd go ahead and whip up another short video showcasing some other elements of the game. So let's talk about the Mutants. Now buckle up, because there's actually a staggering amount of concept art and promotional images in circulation, showing over a dozen of the mutants that might end up in the game. I've tried to put them in order based on how likely they are to make it into the final game, but since the game is still in development, there are no guarantees. First, we have the Craftsmen. These were originally teased as far back as last year and appear to be one of the most basic enemy units in the game. They've appeared in more of the promotional images for the game than any of the other enemies. According to the original teaser, they're an alien mutated organism with human and crab elements, combined to make formidable close combat foes. They also appear to be highly adaptable and are one of the mutants that Snapshot has used to showcase their planned mutation system. The mutations we've seen so far include thicker armor plating, massive chitinous body shields, a symbiotic larval creature, which I'll come back to in a moment, and perhaps most interestingly, a human-made gun that's been grafted onto one of its arms. That last mutation is particularly notable because Julian Gollop himself has confirmed that while the aliens initially start off with a much lower technology level than the player does, the aliens are not mindless, and will eventually reach a point where they not only understand how to use human-made equipment, but will actively raid human settlements to steal weapons that they can make use of. Now, I mentioned that I was going to come back to the larva. This thing has been showcased on the official FIG campaign page. It appears in the GIF showing example mutations on a crabman, as well as in a still promotional image, and a GIF of its own where they show it in motion. Julian Gollop has made comments about how some larger mutants can spawn larvae, which can rapidly transform into other types of enemies, and I think it's safe to assume that's what this thing is. Looking back on the crabman with a distinctive head mutation, it makes me wonder if that's supposed to act as a redundancy feature. If you kill a crabman with that mutation, perhaps the larva will separate from the rest of the body and attempt to grow into another enemy. Or maybe I'm overthinking things, and that particular mutation just gives the crabman a nasty new bite attack. And speaking of larvae, and the things that spawn them, that brings us to the Crab Queen. Next to the crabman, the Crab Queen is probably the most heavily showcased enemy in Phoenix Point. It's the first boss monster that they showed off last year, and perhaps the one that they've spent the most time talking about in interviews. These things are massive, roughly the size of a small building, and are designed to showcase many of the game's more unique features. They're capable of generating microbial mist, which can provide them with cover while also reviving and buffing other nearby enemies, and they're capable of generating larvae, which can quickly provide them with reinforcements. When a player faces one of these things, their best bet is to target individual body parts to neutralize whatever they consider to be the greatest threat. Targeting the mist generator on its back will stop them from creating any more microbial mist, while taking out its egg sac will prevent it from spawning more larvae. Disabling its limbs will greatly reduce its offense and mobility, but those are protected by heavy armor. Disabling its head will drive it into a directionless berserker rage, but that has the chance of doing more harm than good. In an interview with Polygon, Julian Gollop even mentioned that you can walk beneath a Crab Queen and target its underside, but he also stressed that doing it was very dangerous. Next we have this thing, something that Julian Gollop has referred to as the Tiddler. Another boss-sized monstrosity, the Tiddler was featured in the gameplay that Snapshot showcased at select conventions. Emerging near the end of the demo, the Tiddler resembles a giant spider and uses a mist generator to cloak its approach. It's possible that this piece of concept art here actually pictures one of the Tiddler's other forms of attack, or perhaps one of the ways it can end up mutating during a campaign. Tiddler, by the way, is apparently a British term referring to a small fish. That concerns me a bit, since this thing is clearly the size of a bus. Maybe it's an in-joke, referring to the fact that there are some much larger mutants out there. And that brings us to the Behemoth. These things are one of the largest mutants in the game, so large that you can't actually fight them conventionally. They're the size of cities, and their sole purpose seems to be wandering through the mists in search of human settlements. Once they find one, they crash through them, destroying them utterly and slaughtering everyone inside. Once they've begun advancing on a settlement, the only way to stop them is by dispatching soldiers on a special mission to actually land atop the Behemoth and use mini drill rigs to cut through its thick hide. Then they can be killed or disabled using explosives, Or, as shown in this screenshot, xenovenom specifically designed to kill the aliens. And then there's... Good God, what am I looking at? Okay, well, this nameless thing obviously has human components. The bulk of it looks like a skinned human body and could easily be compared to the visceral skinless things that were heavily featured in John Carpenter's The Thing. But beyond that, I honestly can't say where the rest of it might have come from. The arms appear to be some sort of tentacles, but don't resemble the tentacles of a squid or octopus. The head, at least from the front, could resemble a clam or oyster, or perhaps even a Venus flytrap, but that illusion is shattered the moment you see it in motion. Well, whatever it is, it's horrifying, and the fact that they've already rendered and animated it means it's almost certainly going to end up in the final game. Well, good. I'm looking forward to meeting one, I guess. Hastily moving on, let's take a look at some of the mutants that have recently been showcased in the Fig campaign updates. These 3 alien concepts are modeled in plasticine, sculpted by the insanely talented Alexander Ignatov. Snapshot Games has mentioned that these sculptures provide an excellent foundation for building 3-dimensional computer models, which may imply that these mutants are already being implemented into the game. First, we have what they've referred to as a hybrid of hammerhead shark, squid, and human. This thing looks insanely dangerous, with a mouthful of razor-sharp shark teeth, tentacled limbs, and a second set of human limbs that I'm sure will be capable of wielding stolen weapons. If I had to guess, I'd say that it's designed to grapple your soldiers from a distance before drawing them in close so it can tear them apart with its teeth. Another recent aquatic mutant they showcased was this nightmare, which they referred to as the Medusa. Given the name, I think it's safe to assume that this thing is based on the Cnidarian polyp, a type of ocean life that's closely related to the Medusa jellyfish. Polyps are stationary predators that use numerous poison tentacles to paralyze passing sea life before devouring it. I suspect that this Medusa mutant will rely on a similar tactic, using numerous poison tentacles to cripple or paralyze your soldiers so that it can start eating them alive. Most recently, Snapshot Games showcased this mutant in their 7th campaign update. They call it the Mermaid. It's obviously a twisted take on the conventional mermaid of legend, being half fish and half human, but entirely monstrous in form. Perhaps the most notable difference is the head, which in this case appears to be made up of grasping hands, or perhaps those are poisonous tendrils. Now we're moving into mutants that have thus far only appeared in concept art, though I'll be starting with mutants who have appeared in multiple images. First we have the Mist Stalker. Much like the Crabman, the Mist Stalker seems to start off as a melee-based unit, but can generate mutations that will change its specific role in combat. The default form sports tentacles, which will presumably grant it some degree of range with its attacks and may allow it to grapple your soldiers. The Brawler variant seems to have shorter but likely deadlier weapons, while the Shielded Gunner is obviously more heavily armored, while also sporting a stolen human firearm that will allow it to make ranged attacks. On Reddit, Julian Gollop commented that there would be a zombie gestation period similar to the one caused by the Tentaculat and Chrysalid in the earlier XCOM titles, so it might be fair to speculate that these Mist Stalkers are the result of that. This concept art shows a close-up of the Mist Stalker's head, which does appear to be buckling outward, perhaps implying that this is a former soldier who's just acting as an incubator for something else that's growing inside him. Next we have this thing. At a glance, it's hard to tell what we're really looking at, but in this case, the developers have helpfully identified it as a dog. That's right, this is apparently what the Pandora Virus does to man's best friend. Although each of the 3 concept pictures is somewhat different in form, the one feature that they all seem to share is a hugely distended mouth full of sharp teeth. I suspect that these will probably be weaker enemies that will roam in large packs, perhaps only appearing later in the game, once the Pandora Virus has had a chance to infect more land-based animals. Now we're moving into mutants who have only appeared in a single piece of concept art. While they may very well end up making it into the final game, there's not much evidence yet that they've made it past the conceptual stage. This, for example, was the original piece of concept art that Snapshot Games released back when they started their newsletter in 2016. It hasn't appeared in any of the promotional images since then, so it's possible that they decided not to actually put it in the game. Visually, I want to say that it looks like a hybrid that's mostly human, but with elements of a mantis shrimp mixed into it. The most obvious elements being the long mantis-like upper arms and the spiky lower legs. Much like the shark squid mutant, this thing has a second pair of arms coming from its lower chest, But in this case, they're both sporting human-made weapons, which is a mutation we've also seen on the Craftsmen and the Mist Stalkers. Given the amount of firepower this thing is carrying, I suspect that it's something we wouldn't actually encounter until later in the campaign. Another one of the original teaser images showcased this thing, the Fat One. From its appearance, it looks like it would be slow and restricted to close-range attacks, but also incredibly durable. According to the original blurb that accompanied this piece of concept art, these things are pregnant with a swarm of alien minions, which are likely to be more of the aforementioned larvae. In a more recent interview, Julian Gollop mentioned that one of the things the Pandora Virus might create are giant bats, which may be where this thing comes in. Julian Gollop has stated that when the game first starts, the aliens won't have much in the way of aerial units. They dominate the sea, and the bulk of the mutants can only travel on land as far as the mist can reach. But later in the game, we might start seeing things like this. Julian Gollop also mentioned that the Pandora Virus will eventually create flying swarms, so this could be an example of one of the creatures that make up those swarms. But either way, the introduction of flying units will pose a much greater danger to the player's havens or dropships, which rely on elevation to keep them safe from most mutants. And then we have this cute little fellow. Now I have no idea what this thing is supposed to be, but it does seem to have some similarities to an insect or arthropod. The mouth is somewhat reminiscent of the mouth on the giant mutant caterpillar, more on that thing in a moment, but the spiky fringe around its head reminds me of the numerous claw-like legs on the larva. It might be fair to assume that this is an intermediate mutation, something that grew from a larva but hasn't finished maturing into a bigger, more dangerous creature. Coming back to that mutant caterpillar I mentioned, there's this monstrosity. Visually, this mutant may have been inspired by the aquatic caterpillar indigenous to Hawaii. Its tremendous size obviously indicates that it's a boss monster like the Crab Queen or the Tiddler, but that's where the resemblance ends. Almost completely monstrous in form, the only obvious human elements are the arms lining either side of its upper body, which I suspect it uses to load and fire those missile launchers that are attached to its shoulders. Now we're moving into a bit of a stranger area, relatively speaking. Up to this point, many of the mutants have had human features, but they've generally been mixed with parts from other aquatic species. This concept art, however, shows what they've only referred to as a gunner mutant. Based on comments made during interviews, we do know that the microbial mist can mutate and control humans, just like it can with other animal species. So it's possible that this concept art represents a mutant that the player might start encountering as the Pandora Virus begins overtaking human settlements. But we also know that the disciples of Anu have learned how to use the Pandora Virus to mutate humans as well. So this could actually be an example of one of those mutated disciples. Perhaps even stranger, we have this thing, which is labeled as a Mech Mutant. This concept art raises all sorts of questions. If this is an enemy unit, does it mean that the Pandora Virus will eventually move beyond simply stealing guns and grafting them onto its soldiers? Or perhaps this is supposed to be the result of some of the more extreme research trees, representing the ultimate weapons that New Jericho might develop in their efforts to eradicate the Pandora Virus. And then we have this thing, which appeared in a recent interview with IGN. This thing, called the Pianist, almost seems like it would be more at home in Silent Hill. Again, unlike many of the earlier mutants, this monstrous thing doesn't have any obvious parts from other species. It just seems to be a human-human hybrid. Humanity squared. And that's everything. That's every single promotional image or piece of concept art I could find, showcasing the many, many mutants that might be appearing in Phoenix Point. In interviews, Julian Gollop has made reference to a few other possible enemies, such as swarms of crawling things, giant insects, and chameleons with wings, but we haven't actually seen any images of those just yet. Though there is one other notable enemy that I haven't really talked about yet, and that's the Pandora Virus itself. There's actually a tremendous amount of information already released about the alien virus that started this whole mess, including its apparent origin. In fact, there's so much information available on the Pandora Virus and its origin that I'm going to save it for my next video, which will be a spoiler-heavy look at everything we know about the source of the alien virus. But until then, this is Retcon Raider signing off. Thanks for watching another one of my videos. Remember, although I love talking about Phoenix Point, you can keep up with all the latest news about this great-looking game by visiting the official website and the FIG campaign page. Links are in the description.